debate on the motion that was moved in the morning. Senator Veronica Maina.
Honorable Speaker, thank you for this opportunity to speak into this very important motion, which on the very onset, I want to indicate that I fully support because of the nature and the importance of this motion. Honorable Speaker, we have been thrown into this position where we are at now by the demonstrations that were commenced by Gen Z. These are our children, Honorable Speaker. And Honorable Speaker, they have observed, they have seen how the governance is being carried out in the Republic of Kenya, Mr. Speaker, and they have found there are gaps and issues that have been wanting, Honorable Speaker. It's very regrettable, and I offer my deepest condolences, Mr. Speaker, to all the families who lost their children during this demonstration. It was uncalled for, Mr. Speaker, and maybe it could have been done in a much better way, because no life needed to be lost, Mr. Speaker. This nation has been in crisis in different times, but maybe the actors were different, Mr. Speaker, because one of the periods when this nation was in a crisis was when the new constitution, the Constitution 2010, was being made, Mr. Speaker. And the way it was crafted by the drafters of that constitution, Mr. Speaker, I look at Article 10 of the Constitution and I ask myself, if only the public sector, the state officers, public officers, the executive, the legislature, the judiciary had bound themselves to the national values and principles of governance in Kenya, would we still have been where we were at last week on Tuesday, Mr. Speaker? And in this Article 10, Mr. Speaker, we see the values and the principles that have been enunciated, Mr. Speaker, under the Constitution. And these principles are supposed to apply and be interpreted in line with any person or any state organ, state officers, public officers who are entrusted with public responsibility of performing any public duty. And these principles are supposed to apply across board and to any person who is given an opportunity to implement any public policy decision. And in these national values and principles of governance, which include patriotism, national unity, sharing and devolution of power, the rule of law, democracy, and participation of the people, are some of the principles that are supposed to guide the governance and the implementation of any public policy, Mr. Speaker. A respect to human dignity, equity, social justice, inclusiveness, equality, human rights, non-discrimination, and protection of the marginalized, Mr. Speaker. And when I look at Article 10, 1C, Mr. Speaker, about good governance, integrity, transparency, and accountability, and having regard to sustainable development, if only we had paid more attention, Mr. Speaker, as public officers, as state officers, would we have been where we were last week on Tuesday, Mr. Speaker? I specifically look at the Senate, the role of Senate, as laid out, very well laid out in the Constitution, on issues of good governance, transparency, and accountability, and the fact that we have a function of oversight over the counties. Is there anything we could have done better than how we have done? Maybe yes, Mr. Speaker, maybe there are areas, and there are areas that we need to improve also as a House, Mr. Speaker. The storm we saw in this nation, sweeping this nation, Mr. Speaker, and Parliament being at the eye of this storm, it was also an indictment to the institution of Parliament. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, and to follow what the other speakers have said, because today is not a day of competing on who gives a better speech or who does better debating than the other, I want to apologize that if we have failed as senators, Mr. Speaker, we are sorry. I am sorry, Mr. Speaker. Are there any tools that would have enhanced transparency, that would have slowed down issues of corruption? Mr. Speaker, I have served in other respects, even as a Secretary General of the ruling party, former Secretary General of the ruling party, Mr. Speaker. And I know for a fact it is possible to run a system without collecting a bribe, from my own experience, Mr. Speaker. And I want, as we do this debate, Mr. Speaker, that first of all, it forms a platform for us to have an introspection as Senate, Mr. Speaker. That's our tool. When we do the CPIC and the CPAC committees, what do we do with the reports that emanate from counties where we can see that corruption is rampant, Mr. Speaker? It is my view that as a way of improving the system so that we can have the public inject their confidence once again in this institution, is that the reporting back of those notorious counties should come back to the floor of this House, Mr. Speaker, and action must be taken. Concerted, Mr. Speaker, collective action agreed upon all the senators that what needs to be done by EACC with counties that have had wanton corruption and misuse of public fund, Mr. Speaker, that concrete action must be taken. And Mr. Speaker, we have also had a chance as a House to look at some of the impeachment proceedings. It has also given us time to reflect, Mr. Speaker, on how we have conducted those proceedings and whether they have met the expectation, the legitimate expectation, Mr. Speaker, of the population, Mr. Speaker. To the Gen Z who have woken us up, Mr. Speaker, and who have called institutions to rethink how we are conducting our business, Mr. Speaker, I want to say, this being our children, they have done well and in a very bold way. Without any experience, without having any forms of arms, Mr. Speaker, they came out to resoundingly say something must change. And the finance bill was the trigger, Mr. Speaker. They were not comfortable with how that finance bill was phrased, Mr. Speaker, and the fact that they felt they were not listened to. Was this an expression of just the Gen Z? Maybe it was an expression of many more Kenyans who may not have had an opportunity to express themselves. Mr. Speaker, these young people came out as true patriots, tribeless, without any boundary, Mr. Speaker. They defeated the class division, and they came out, Mr. Speaker, to speak resoundingly. My only unfortunate moment, Mr. Speaker, was when the demonstration was infiltrated and turned violent, Mr. Speaker, and there was a standoff between the demonstrators and the law enforcement and security officers, Mr. Speaker. The conflict that ended up landing some of them into mortuaries, Mr. Speaker. And as Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, we need to have a retrospection of all the officers, the state officers who are seated in public offices. If there was something that was happening that was off and had a tendency to have a corrupt tag, this means the storm now must stop on corrupt practices, Mr. Speaker. Let everybody look through how they are conducting their affairs, beginning with us, Mr. Speaker, because today we are talking about ourselves, more of ourselves. How are we conducting our affairs? For those who are Christians like myself, the good book will guide us into what is godly order. For those who are Muslims, Mr. Speaker, while we are guided by the Bible, the Muslims will be guided by the Quran. But for the nation, Mr. Speaker, we have the Constitution that guides how governance must be done and how structures should be laid out, Mr. Speaker. Where we have gone wrong, Mr. Speaker, does that Constitution offer us an avenue of ventilation? Mine is to call upon the Gen Z. Now that we have begun to listen to what they have to say, mine is to call upon the Gen Z to allow us to walk the order of the Constitution, to accept that an olive branch now has been given by our President, Mr. Speaker, and that is the highest level of executive commitment, that the President is willing to have a forum with the young people, with the Gen Z, and discuss issues that need to be thrashed out, Mr. Speaker, must be taken as a sign of very, very goodwill, Mr. Speaker. And there are those issues that have been laid out. Is it possible for a nation to change within a day? Is it possible for a nation to change within a day? I see it has signaled an opportunity for us to begin the change. And while all the demands may not be met overnight within a week, within 2 weeks, Mr. Speaker, yet some of those things that are glaring, Mr. Speaker, like dealing with the corrupt cases, dealing with issues that are obvious and that have evidence, Mr. Speaker, that ball should begin rolling, Mr. Speaker. Why? Because if we cannot face the change, then change will change us, Mr. Speaker. It is my view, Mr. Speaker, that if we can honestly face ourselves, the society to face itself, EACC to also come out of slumber, take up those files, prosecute those that need to be prosecuted where there is sufficient evidence, Mr. Speaker, that corruption has happened within institutions, Mr. Speaker, then even the Gen Z will begin to see that we are serious and committed to upholding the dignity of every Kenyan, Mr. Speaker. Regarding the jobs, it is true, Mr. Speaker, the youth have faced a lot of unemployment, and I can only imagine how distressing, Mr. Speaker, this is when a young person has gone through schooling and has nothing to do, Mr. Speaker, and yet we are supposed to give solutions as leaders, Mr. Speaker. Those are issues that now need to be tackled in a different way. Is there bias in the way public office employs young people? Mr. Speaker, we need to straighten out the processes. We need to do things, Mr. Speaker, in a different way. And I want to specifically look at the suggestion that has been done by SRC for the raising the salary, Mr. Speaker, of the senators and members of parliament, Mr. Speaker. That proposal, while it may have been good because everybody needs a raise at any point when they are working, a worker needs to be motivated, the timing is so wrong and it is not needed, Mr. Speaker. Least of all by the honorable members. I haven't met one single member still, Mr. Speaker, and I'm only repeating this because it has been said, but we are repeating it to affirm the fact, Mr. Speaker, that none of these officers seated here today, none of these legislators had asked for that increment. And we would call upon the SRC to be a little bit more serious with their tasks. They have a heavy, their entry is full with claims by intern doctors, Mr. Speaker, with claims from JSS, Mr. Speaker, the teachers in JSS, Mr. Speaker. Have those issues been handled yet? Are there opportunities where young people could be accommodated within the public sector where that available funding can then be disbursed towards supporting them, Mr. Speaker? We need to think outside the box and say, let's do things differently, Mr. Speaker, because if we do not do it differently, Mr. Speaker, once again, the change would change us, Mr. Speaker. I want to commend the Gen Z and also note that their level of debate, Mr. Speaker, in spite of the fact that there were quite a number of insults that are coming across the X space, I have also equally noted, Mr. Speaker, that these are very young, intelligent Kenyans, Mr. Speaker. Their level of debate is very different from the levels of debates that we are having, Mr. Speaker. And for a moment, I asked myself, could this be the reason that maybe they don't watch the mainstream media? Because their level of analysis of issues was different and was very refined. They have facts and figures. There is nothing you would tell them about who was given which tender, Mr. Speaker. They are able to analyze for you from county number 1 to county number 47, how many tenders have been awarded by each county, who has been awarded, which companies have been awarded, who owns those companies. All that information, Mr. Speaker, is with the Gen Z. I must commend the level of transparency, because it's only when we are transparent and open with ourselves and with the systems and with the processes that change will begin to sweep across the whole nation, Mr. Speaker. All I want to persuade now, Mr. Speaker, to the Gen Z and to the people of Kenya, we have a nation Many of us do not have an alternative to our nation, our statehood here. We belong to Kenya, Mr. Speaker. We are Kenyan citizens, Mr. Speaker. We do not even have dual citizenship, some of us. We have no other home except this home called Kenya. And Mr. Speaker, Kenya has been like a labor ward for many nations in this region, especially in the Great Lakes region, Mr. Speaker. And we must preserve our nationhood. We call for peace. We call for the end of the demonstrations, Mr. Speaker, and we allow dialogue to happen. We allow an opportunity for us to sit together. And I want to say to the Gen Z, who are our children actually, I'm a mother to 3 Gen Zs, Mr. Speaker, that if they ever had a friend, they have a friend in Senate. We are open to receive every petition. We are open to listen to them. We are open to see the issues that they don't agree, Mr. Speaker, with us, Mr. Speaker, and we are ready to implement what we can legislatively do to ensure that their confidence in us, Mr. Speaker, is restored. And I have also noted, Mr. Speaker, that they had very big issues also with the church. For some, they supported the church. For some, they had very big issues with the church and religious institutions, Mr. Speaker. And that has also now called for change in the way we conduct public officers, conduct their business with religious bodies, Mr. Speaker, so that if the fundraisers are causing so much trouble and so much drama, then, Mr. Speaker, it is time for us to rethink our position on how we handle that. And I speak that both as a believer and a very strong church member, that it is important we preach this gospel and preach it in such a way that, Mr. Speaker, it is acceptable not only to our age group, but it's also acceptable to our young children, acceptable to our young adults, acceptable to the students, and acceptable to the whole population, Mr. Speaker. This is an issue that has been pending on our in-tray, and a lot of pressure has come on the politicians also, if we can be honest about the fundraisers, Mr. Speaker, because when your competitor as a politician gives some money for fundraiser, which another politician cannot match, Mr. Speaker, instantly there is a liking by the public towards the one who is giving, and the one who is not giving is seen as though they are not working, Mr. Speaker. So the definition of public work or public service has to now be separated from fundraiser aspect, Mr. Speaker, so that a legislator who is supposed to be in Parliament doing oversight, doing legislation, doing representation, Mr. Speaker, must not be seen as a money minting machine. So we need to slow down, even as Kenyans, how we conduct our business with the public officers. For instance, when a Kenyan is paying a bribe to a police officer, is it a member of Parliament who asked them to pay that bribe? Maybe not, Mr. Speaker. It's a cultural change. And what the Gen Zs have said is that it is time for us to change our culture. We must be able to offer an environment, a governance environment, Mr. Speaker, where we can work 24 hours. We work daytime, we work at night, and women and children will have the security to walk through the streets, Mr. Speaker, and be able to conduct their businesses within a 24-hour economy. Mr. Speaker, I know Kenyans are smart people. We have seen the wanton destruction of property. My deepest apologies to all the business people who have suffered losses, heavy losses, and as a result of which a number of people may equally lose jobs. Young people will lose jobs, Mr. Speaker. That's an unfortunate position, one which we should not have found ourselves in. I walked through Mama Gina Street, Mr. Speaker, yesterday, and all those businesses, they have been broken. Some criminals broke into those businesses, Mr. Speaker, and took away the stocks that were in that shop. The display windows are gone, Mr. Speaker. They need to not only repair the premises, but restock the businesses before they can give anybody any job. That is not a position we would wish to be in, Mr. Speaker. And it's my very humble plea to Kenyans that we allow ourselves to go back to normal day, Mr. Speaker, when there is a busy activity in Mama Gina Street, in downtown, Mr. Speaker, in the uptown, Mr. Speaker, in our malls, Mr. Speaker. And what we have seen happen happening to Quickmart must not happen to any other business in Republic of Kenya. For a very long time, Kenya has been setting the trend for the East African region and has been setting the trend for the Great Lakes region and in Africa, Mr. Speaker, and we must allow ourselves to bounce our nation back to a position of being a great example to be emulated in Africa. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity.
Senator Okongo Mogeni.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to also contribute to this motion. Mr. Speaker, from the onset, I stand to support the bipartisan approach that has been adopted by the majority side and the minority. So I want to thank Senator Cheruiyot, our youthful leader, majority leader from the majority side, and our elder, Justice Retired Stuart Mazayo, who under the leadership of Senator Wambua have brought us together to have a discourse as Kenyans. We thank you, our dear colleagues. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I first want to pass my message of condolences to the mothers, the fathers, brothers and sisters of the 34, I'm told now it's 34, Kenyans who lost their lives during these demonstrations. Mr. Speaker, as a father, as a son to a mother, it's a painful thing to lose a son or a daughter, especially one who has given himself or herself to fight for a just cause, to make this country better, Mr. Speaker. These fallen heroes, Mr. Speaker, were motivated by one desire to improve the landscape of our governance. They wanted to make the lives of many of us better, Mr. Speaker. And there are many of us, Mr. Speaker, who have benefited from this very courageous Gen Z generation that put the government on toes by the demonstration. Mr. Speaker, as a lawyer, I know that the right to picket, the right to demonstrate, the right to withdraw support from a government is enshrined in our Constitution, as long as it's peaceful and geared to passing a message to the government of the day. So it's something that, Mr. Speaker, we cannot fail to acknowledge that the Gen Zs have a right, Mr. Speaker, to picket, to demonstrate. And world all over, Mr. Speaker, we know that there are people who have led peaceful protests and they have changed the world, Mr. Speaker. We know, Mr. Speaker, that in 1964, the celebrated Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in the United States of America led the march to Washington that led to the enactment of the Civil Rights Act in the United States of America that gave Americans their civil rights, Mr. Speaker. So we regret, Mr. Speaker, that there are Kenyans, I'm told about 8 of them, who lost their lives within the precincts of Parliament. That is regrettable, Mr. Speaker, and it's my prayer and wish, Mr. Speaker, that as we move forward, we also demand for accountability from our security forces, Mr. Speaker. We know that a well-trained police force that follows what Kenyans passed when we enacted the 2010 Constitution, in Chapter 14, they know that they are supposed to be guided by principles of human rights, rule of law, democracy, Mr. Speaker. And the rule of law, Mr. Speaker, dictates that if you come across a demonstrator who has broken the law, what we expect as a country is to have that Kenyan arrested and presented before courts of law. That's the only way, Mr. Speaker, we can build a country that truly can pride itself as one that respects and operates within the tenets of the rule of law. Mr. Speaker, we watch international media. We see demonstrations every day You see them in France, you see them in the United States, we see them in Britain, but hardly will you see cases where police officers will open fire on unarmed demonstrators. We expect, Mr. Speaker, that one of the resolutions we'll make as a committee is to hold accountable the police officers who may have used excessive force. So I mourn with those Kenyans, and I plead that part of the recommendations, Mr. Speaker, should be how we extend assistance to the parents of these children who have lost their loved ones as they prepare for their burial. I applaud the CS Health who released a press release today confirming that the government has waived all the medical bills for those Kenyans. So we must move a step further, Mr. Speaker, and ensure that we extend assistance. Mr. Speaker, this Gen Z, it is this Gen Z that we owe. We failed, me included, in stopping the passage of that very draconian finance bill. If it was not for this Gen Z, that finance bill would be low today. So we owe them. Without them, Senator Kalwale, finance bill 2024 would be low today. That is a reality, Mr. Speaker. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, we must also accept as a country that we are in extraordinary times, which calls for extraordinary measures from extraordinary leaders, Mr. Speaker. What we have seen is a Gen Z that has demonstrated extraordinary ability. How these young people are able to mobilize and be out in the streets without choosing your social status is amazing, Mr. Speaker. We have children who are in Gen Z generation, whom you may think are fairly privileged, but they identify with the cause of the Gen Z that is in the streets, Mr. Speaker. If you have a son, watch how they are hooked to this, it's called X space conversations, Mr. Speaker. So it tells us, Mr. Speaker, that there is something that we have not done right, Mr. Speaker. I propose, Mr. Speaker, that as we go forward, Mr. Speaker, we must accept that this country is facing a number of challenges and we must look for solutions. Mr. Speaker, the first point I want to make, Mr. Speaker, and I want to speak to the President. The first point, Mr. Speaker, if the President needs to restore respectability, because the public trust on the presidency is at the lowest, Mr. Speaker. If you listen to the X space, even when the President was answering questions, the responses were that we cannot trust him. So the biggest challenge for the President is to win back the public trust, Mr. Speaker. Public trust on the President is at its lowest, Mr. Speaker. So we urge the President to begin by respecting the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. Let him begin by respecting the Constitution. And Mr. Speaker, he can go for the low-hanging fruits. We have seen what this Gen Z generation has been posting on social media. The major attack is on how the President has exercised power before. That is the problem. If we don't acknowledge that as a House, we will not be able to solve the challenges we are facing, Mr. Speaker. The feeling, Mr. Speaker, is that the President has not allowed Parliament, both the Senate and the National Assembly, to carry its duties as an independent institution, Mr. Speaker. Most of these unpopular legislations that triggered these demonstrations were pushed through the two houses. You know about the housing levy that led, it was called Affordable Housing Bill that created the now Affordable Housing Act. It was pushed through, Mr. Speaker. If we had adopted a bipartisan approach, we would have made that law less punitive to Kenyans. Because the cry, if you listen to the young professionals, the young doctors, the young lawyers, they are crying about an invasion on their payslip. Even those who work for Parliament, their cry is that they are facing a government that is raiding their pockets day in, day out. Their pocket was raided in the first budget. Their pocket has been raided in the second budget. Mr. Speaker, this issue of corruption, I want to join my colleague Senator Cheriot that we will not fix it unless we have a radical surgery on EACC, Mr. Speaker. And I will give you an example on what has happened in the county of Nyamira. Mr. Speaker, in the month of August 2022, while we are just in the run-up to the elections, the governor of Nyamira unilaterally paid himself to his account 6.573 million, Mr. Speaker. And I'm speaking here as a person who speaks the truth, and I want to table that payslip before the House. It's here. He paid himself 6.573 billion. A whistleblower, million. The payslip is here, and I beg to table, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when EACC was summoned to Nyamira, instead of recording a statement and taking that governor to court, they got money from him, and then they told him, we can agree, you just refunded the money quietly, Mr. Speaker. What a shame. What a shame, Mr. Speaker. How can that be from a body that is supposed to be fighting corruption, Mr. Speaker? What stops another officer in the county government of Nyamira paying himself, and then when EACC goes, they will say, but you did that to the governor. We also want a settlement, Mr. Speaker. This guy, Governor Amos Nyaribo, Mr. Speaker, should have been arrested, arraigned before a court of law, and a conviction given by the courts, Mr. Speaker. That's the only way you can send a message, Mr. Speaker, that you are intent in fighting corruption. Let me even shock you further, Mr. Speaker, because I've worked with the documents. There was another case, Mr. Speaker. Officers within the county government of Nyamira, Mr. Speaker, hatched a scheme to siphon money from the public coffers of the county government of Nyamira. And they came up with ghost names, whom up to today nobody knows, and they paid them a total of 800,000, Mr. Speaker. These guys were investigated for those offenses, charged with abuse of office. One, Godfrey Kiriago and Geoffrey Nyamagwa, Mr. Speaker, arrested, taken to court for that crime they committed, Mr. Speaker. Once the case was registered, and I have the charge sheet here, as criminal case E510 of 2023, Mr. Speaker, they had a secret meeting with the DPP, Mr. Speaker, and that case, Mr. Speaker, was withdrawn under Section 82(1) of the Criminal Procedure Code, Mr. Speaker. What a shame. Mr. Speaker, when the county government was being summoned to appear in Nairobi, they had the audacity to tell the committee of the Senate, Mr. Speaker, that they have taken action of relieving Mr. Kiriago from service at the county government of Nyamira and send him back to the national government so that he can continue with these fraudulent activities, Mr. Speaker. If this is the kind of conduct we are going to have from the office of EACC, from the office of the DPP, how will we ever fight corruption, Mr. Speaker? And I table this document, Mr. Speaker, before the House so that this conduct of EACC can be on the table. And Mr. Speaker, I'm of the view, Mr. Speaker, that if the Senate of the Republic of Kenya will find these documents to be genuine, then the commissioners at EACC and the CEO of EACC should be the first one to face the chop. Senator Cheriot, we cannot allow that kind of impunity. Mr. Speaker, just to tell you the kind of challenge this country is facing, if you read the auditor's report, Mr. Speaker, it tells you that the county government of Nyamira has exceeded Regulation 22 on personnel emoluments by 22%. It is at 57, and I have the document. And Mr. Speaker, I want to assure the people of Nyamira that if I've said a lie this afternoon, I'll go to Tinga, where I was born, in West Mogirango, Basamaro constituency, and tender my resignation. The documents I'm tendering before this House are authentic. They are from our public offices, from government offices, and they just give just a snippet of the kind of rot that we have, Mr. Speaker. Once this report was prepared by the Auditor General, and we got a qualified, audited accounts, Mr. Speaker, saying that our personnel emoluments were at 57%. The governor had the audacity, Mr. Speaker, of proceeding again to advertise and employ a further 200 workers. Meaning, next time the auditors go to Nyamira, it will be at 60-something%. What kind of impunity is this, Mr. Speaker? And I table this report before the Senate. Mr. Speaker, this kind of rot is not just happening in the county government of Nyamira. It's replicated at the national government, Mr. Speaker. The position of CAS, and this we're having a conversation, Mr. Speaker, the positions of cabinet administrative secretaries are unconstitutional. The Gen Zs have told us that those positions should not even exist, Mr. Speaker. But I have information, Mr. Speaker, that the head of public service, Felix Kosgei, has already written, and that statement was said on the floor, to the Public Service Commission, trying to push them to appoint those positions. What message are we sending, Mr. Speaker? That is impunity. And I'm urging both members of National Assembly and the Senate, Mr. Speaker, if the president cannot take action, will be prescriptive, Mr. Speaker. These times call for action, and they call for action from us, not yesterday but today. If the president does not have the courage, Mr. Speaker, I beseech us as parliamentarians to come up with an amendment and repeal the National Government Coordination Act that created those positions. That's the only time, Mr. Speaker, will be taken serious, Mr. Speaker. If you read the Constitution in Article 152, Mr. Speaker, it gives the presidency the maximum of the number of CSs he can employ at 22, and then a minimum of 14, Mr. Speaker. We have 1,900 doctors. We are not able to take for internship. Do you call it internship, Dr. Kalwale? For internship, Mr. Kalwale, because we are saying our budget cannot support, Mr. Speaker. What we need to do, or what I expect the president to do, he has so many corrupt cabinet secretaries who are giving the country a bad name. Sack them. Reduce the cabinet to 14. And the money you save, Mr. Speaker, can be used to employ those doctors for internship. Article 155, Mr. Speaker, does not give the number of principal secretaries that we should have as a country. It has been abused. It has been abused. Do we need, honestly, do we need 51 principal secretaries? No. We don't. We don't. And I'm urging my colleagues, if we agree, Mr. Speaker, we can marshal 2/3. We amend the Constitution, prescribe, put there a maximum of 14 principal secretaries, Mr. Speaker. Because then the youths want to see action from us. Nobody can legislate other than we as senators. Mr. Speaker, why do you create a ministry and then you create 3 departments, Mr. Speaker? I have friends, but I don't have positions to employ all my friends, Mr. Speaker. So we want to urge the president to also talk to his friends and tell them the cake is too small. Not everybody will get a piece, Mr. Speaker. Not everybody will get a piece. Some will get, some will miss, Mr. Speaker. So they cannot put pressure on the president that, you know, I was the candidate in Muhaya, I don't know what, so you must appoint me either ambassador, CS, principal secretary. It cannot work, Mr. Speaker. So if the president does not act within the next 7 days, let us move a constitutional amendment, Mr. Speaker. We be prescriptive. We put the number there, Mr. Speaker. We cap it at 22 maximum, but it can operate with 14. These are extraordinary times. That money we save, Mr. Speaker, we take it and employ JSS teachers, Mr. Speaker. These are the guys who are in the streets demonstrating, Mr. Speaker. We make them also have a bite of the national cake, Mr. Speaker. Instead of saying this cake will only be for principal secretaries. for cabinet secretaries. Cannot be that way, Mr. Speaker. Because this country, we almost lost it, Mr. Speaker. Maybe, we don't know, but maybe we are being given a second chance, Mr. Speaker. And my brother, Senator Cheruiyot, I compare you with Lyndon Johnson, former president of the United States of America. He became the leader of the Senate while very youthful, but he provided leadership. And he was blessed by Almighty God because he ended up becoming a president of the United States of America. The fact that you have the majority does not mean that you exercise tyranny over Kenyans. I'm telling you, my brother, you can have the numbers, but you can still give leadership. You can create a legacy for yourself. In 1936, when Franklin was president of the United States of America, his majority in House of Representatives was 333 members. The opposition had only 89. In the Senate, he had 83. The opposition, Republicans, had only 17. But when he came up with an unpopular legislation to amend the Supreme Court Act to increase the number of judges from 9 to 15, so that he gets himself an opportunity to pick 6, his own party, Democrats, rejected that move. Those were his members of his party. But because they put the interest of the country ahead of the interest of the president, they rejected that move. So we also want to urge our colleagues.
Allow Senator Mugeni 2 minutes to sum up.
Yes. So,
Senator Okenyuri, just have a seat. Before we started this motion, there's some ground rules that every senator taking to the microphone will be allowed to speak their heart uninterrupted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the point I was making, Mr. Speaker, is that the leadership of the House then was able to put the interests of the country ahead of personal or party interest, Mr. Speaker. We have a bloated cabinet, Mr. Speaker. Not cabinet, we have a bloated government. I want to conclude by urging my colleagues to reconsider an audit of the 2010 Constitution, Mr. Speaker. We have so many constitutional commissions with people serving part-time but doing nothing. Mr. Speaker, how can a body that reviews my salary once a year be working from Monday to Friday? This body called, how? And how? Mr. Speaker, that you sit to review the salary of Senator Mugeni from January to December, Monday to Friday. How can you? Then Mr. Speaker, and I'm rejecting that offer. Then after you have reviewed that for the whole of 1 year, you tell me I've reviewed you with 14,000, which I don't want. Don't want it. We cannot, Mr. Speaker. So we must audit this constitution, Mr. Speaker. Some of these guys who are earning huge amount of salary, Mr. Speaker, we convert them to part-time. That's what the Gen Zs want us to do, Mr. Speaker. If you go to the judiciary, Mr. Speaker, we cannot afford this idea of employing judges left, center, and right, Mr. Speaker. It's not easy to maintain a judge. When you employ a judge, you must give them a car, you must pay them house. We have a judge here, he will tell you. It's not easy, Mr. Speaker. The other day, a motion was taken to the National Assembly. It never came to us. The number of judges of Court of Appeal increased to 70. You have special courts, land and environment. You see they can employ up to 100. Labor, Mr. Speaker, you are a lawyer. A judge who was posted to Kilgoris to deal with land matters stayed there for 3 months. Then they left because there were no cases. Senator Viga, a judge was sent to your county. Esther, she's a Kisi. After 6 months, she went away. There are no cases. Another one went to Malindi. After staying there for 7 months, there were no more cases. How can that be? They made a presentation before us. Senator Cheruiyot was there. And they proposed that we should...
Senator S.C. Okenyuri.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. And let me just clarify, I was not interjecting my senior Senator Omogeni. I was bringing to your attention that in as much as we are pressing these gadgets, our names do not reflect where the clerks are. So I want to appreciate, because I've been literally on my knees since morning, want to engage on this issue. Mr. Speaker, first, I want to give my condolences to the families who lost their young people amid the ongoing protests, starting with one Rex Masai and several others whose names I might not mention on this floor, Mr. Speaker. You can actually see, if we have to strain to even get chance to speak, and yet we represent young people in this house, what about the several young people who are watching us to air their issues in this house, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, whatever issues that have been brought by the Gen Zs are not new issues in this country. Look at the issue of restructuring government. We had the Abdikadir report of 2015 that actually listed the parastatals in this country and how to deal with different policy issues that were affecting each. Mr. Speaker, we do not need a repeat of the same. We have very intelligent Kenyans who've gone down and actually done this work and given recommendations, which those recommendations are gathering dust in the name of reports which have never been implemented to date, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the issue of Gen Z is not going to be forgotten anytime soon. It will keep reoccurring. But I want to urge that let it not be that we have to have protests for issues regarding young people, Kenyans, to be heard. Mr. Speaker, these are some of the reasons why generally people feel like maybe we are not listening. Mr. Speaker, when you look at some of the issues they seconded, if I refer to DCI, DCI needs to conclude their investigations on some of the people who are arrested. IPOA also needs to swing into action. An organization like NCIC should be disbanded with immediate effect, Mr. Speaker, because a lot of hate is going round all over and no one is doing anything about it, Mr. Speaker. We cannot, those are some of the organizations which are siphoning public resources without nabbing people who are actually giving hate to the public and inciting the public, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I also talk about the matter where SRC is recommending a pay rise for legislators, I want to turn down that in particular, Mr. Speaker, and I hope the newspaper headlines tomorrow will be reading that MPs protest pay rises. Mr. Speaker, it can't be that when one issue is good for the other, it's bad for another. When corruption in the national government is mentioned, let the county governments also be mentioned, Mr. Speaker. The money that SRC wants to add us should go into putting that money together so that JSS teachers can be employed, more equipping of public health facilities, so that Kenyans generally get the services they rightfully require, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also want to indicate that social media is a very active tool, and I salute the young people for agitating for change in this country, Mr. Speaker. We didn't have to wait for the young people to set direction, because sometimes, starting with this house, we are told of ranking members, so we are borrowing from those who have come before us. But in this case, the list of the expected in society are the ones who are now giving direction, Mr. Speaker. That needs to be something we as a house need to reflect about, and not just leave it to maybe the president to implement, The president has already invited the young people on X tomorrow, and I want to encourage most of them to flood that space and raise whatever issues they have to do with how best we can change leadership in this country. But as much as that is left to the president, we as politicians also need to put a hand in playing a role to fight corruption, Mr. Speaker. Because corruption, I actually think Kenyans generally, we are born with an affinity towards wanting to do something to get something in return. Mr. Speaker, we want a society where for me to ascend to power, it shouldn't be about my DNA or sexual orientation, Mr. Speaker. That's the only way we can encourage young people who are watching me this afternoon from different rural villages to also be good in whatever they are doing and call a spade, Mr. Speaker. As I come down to conclude what I actually had to say this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, we've had several recommendations from serious reports that have been written in this country. We need to revisit the recommendation by those reports, like the Abdul Qadir Mohammed report actually mentions most of these state corporations that should be wound up or how to better transform them so that services can be given to the people. We cannot purely make those corporations avenues to give jobs to people who have already exceeded their usefulness, Mr. Speaker. We have several young people who are looking into these jobs. And by the way, most of the young people who are demonstrating, they are able to do whatever works they do, like in the digital economy. Most of them are earning online. So whatever they want to be implemented by the government currently is to ensure that they have a conducive environment whereby they can smoothly make their money, so that we are not making them poor and creating paradises for ourselves, Mr. Speaker. As I conclude and take a seat, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that let us not downplay the whole issue of agitation for change in this country. It's real. I have most of my friends who are actually on the streets, and I couldn't actually tell them anything because then they'll think I'm here to praise and worship the government that has given me an appointment. Sometimes, Mr. Speaker, it's also good to speak the truth as it is, because it is in one way that we make our governance better, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want today to say maybe otherwise what I wouldn't have said in my few remaining years in this House. To the President, we need radical changes. People need to see heads rolling. Mr. Speaker, we've had people who've been implicated in several scandals which are well known to public domain. Politics should be separated with friendship. If you hold on to your friends, Mr. President, we unfortunately might sink down with them. So separate friendship from work. We are here to support your agenda. I believed in your agenda and I still do, but we need to separate the politics from friendship for us to steer this nation forward, so that we don't see the unnecessary issues we are seeing now. Because as we see now, the protesters have been infiltrated by anarchists who want to take us back to where we have been. Mr. Speaker, this is not about Gen Z. It should be a general call by Kenyans, and let it start with we members of Parliament. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Osotsi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I want to say that I support this motion, but hoping that we will bring amendments so that all the good things that members are talking here will also be captured in that motion. I will start by sending my condolences to the family, friends of those who have lost their lives. There are over 30 people, but we hope the exact number is going to be provided. Mr. Speaker, I also want to express my sympathies to the family of those people who lost their lives within the precincts of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that Parliament requires to be cleansed because the blood of innocent Kenyans is within the presence of Parliament, and I hope those of us who believe in prayers will have prayers to also cleanse Parliament so that we continue as a holy institution, as a sacred institution, and as a respected institution. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Senate leadership, led by yourselves and the minority and majority leaders, for this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, as we are reflecting on what is happening in our nation, the house that has caused all this problem, they are in hiding, Mr. Speaker. They are in hiding. Many of them are hiding from the people. Many of them don't want to be seen in public because they know what they did was not right. And the Senate has taken up the challenge of being a house of reason to discuss these issues freely. And I just hope, Mr. Speaker, whatever we discuss here, we debate here, should not just end with this debate, but we should have a system of ensuring that whatever we talk about here is actually implemented. I think that will be the main challenge as we debate this particular motion, that what strategies are we going to employ to ensure the many good things we have discussed are implemented. Mr. Speaker, I think the protest by the Gen Zs is a awakening call to the government and to the entire population of Kenya. And this is a moment that we require to reflect and reset our nation, reset the Senate, reset the National Assembly, and reset all the state organs so that they comply to the wishes of the many Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, I have listened to all the speakers who had an opportunity to speak to this motion. But Mr. Speaker, I want to divert a bit and say the problem of this nation is here. The problem of this nation is with the Parliament of Kenya. The problem of the other institution that is responsible for our problem is the presidency. And we have not talked eloquently about that. I want to take this chance to talk about that, Mr. Speaker. Parliament, what happened to Parliament? Parliament was a holy institution that was always on the side of the people. And I remember, Mr. Speaker, when I was a student at the university here, long before I knew I would become a politician, I used to come to the public galleries to watch Boni, Khalwale here, Onyonka here, debate. To debate. And I used to enjoy the debate, Mr. Speaker. I used to enjoy the debate because they were debating openly and there was no fear. And they were there for the people of Kenya. But Parliament of Kenya, Mr. Speaker, and I'm not accusing anyone, we have descended. Parliamentary democracy has descended in this country. When we talk about all the omissions that we have talked about, someone listening to us will ask, what have you people done? All this has happened under your watch. What have you done? When we say the IG should be removed from office, what has Parliament done? That is National Assembly and the Senate. So we stand to be blamed by Kenyans. And when we reflect, I think a lot of reflection has to be focused on Parliament. Mr. Speaker, we have allowed Parliament to be an appendage of the state. We have allowed Parliament to be an appendage of state. How do you feel when before a critical bill before the House, parliamentary group meetings are held in State House? Mr. Speaker, I think we need to change the standing orders so that all parliamentary group meetings are held within the presence of Parliament. Even my own party, ODM, we should hold our meetings within the presence of Parliament. Let our leader come here and chair our meetings. Let President Ruto come to this Parliament and chair the parliamentary group meeting within the presence of Parliament. The idea of us being taken to State House and given orders on how to operate in this house, how to vote, has to stop from today. Mr. Speaker, we always start on a wrong note when we have a new Parliament. That even our own leadership for parliamentary committees and especially departmental committees, it is decided in State House. And our own secretariats here in Parliament just facilitates that. We need to ensure parliamentary democracy comes back so that let the members of the committee freely elect their leader. Because I have served in the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker, and I saw chairs of committees were behaving like PS to cabinet secretaries. How will they oversight cabinet secretary when you as a chair, you are very cozy with the cabinet secretary? You go to his office to drink tea in the morning, to eat lunch, seek favors, and this person is supposed to appear before you to answer questions. How is it possible? Honorable members, I think before we blame any other institution, we have to start here. We remember in 2008, when Marende was the Speaker of the National Assembly, when everyone thought that the country was going to burn, Parliament stood and united the country through the Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you have done so well as a Speaker. But I'm sorry, the Speaker of the National Assembly has let us down. Because you cannot be a Speaker of the National Assembly and then over the weekend you put on party colors. To go to meetings, political meetings, make political statements. I'm the kingpin of the Luya. I am the party leader of this party. We need to have speakers who are impartial, who are independent,
Senator,
so that they can lead us on the way.
Senator
Honorable Wakoli, my friend, we are reflecting. Allow us to reflect.
Just take a second.
Allow us to reflect. Allow us to reflect. Allow us to reflect.
Order, Honorable Senator.
I am saying this.
Senator Osotsi, just take a seat. Honorable Senators, we have started so well. Order, Honorable Senators. Before debate started on this particular motion, we said because of the sensitivity and where we are, we allow ourselves to ventilate as much as we can with less interruption. Many of the statements that are going to be made here may touch us not in a friendly way, but yet they have to be said if you're to move forward. So, honorable senators, if we have to move forward, we need to face each other and speak the truth. And ordinarily the truth, no matter the pain that truth may cause, if you are to move forward. And therefore, Honorable Wakoli, when I give you the opportunity, you will have a chance to correct facts that you feel they were not put in the correct fashion. So kindly allow Senator Osotsi to complete his intervention, and thereafter when you rise, you will have that opportunity to put your case as you see, as you deem it fit. Proceed, Senator Osotsi.
Mr. Speaker, I didn't intend to hurt my good friend, the Speaker of the National Assembly, but this is a moment of reflection, and this is something I've thought. I have seen the norms, parliamentary norms, even within the Commonwealth, and it may